This is ProPresenter 7, and before we get started, I just wanted to spell one rumor, one question that everyone seems to have, and that question is, can you have ProPresenter 7 work on the same machine as ProPresenter 6? And the answer is, if you go down here to my dock, you'll see, oops, yes, ProPresenter 6 works perfectly fine just beside ProPresenter 7. Now, depending on the machine, you may not want to run them at exactly the same time, but if you shut down Pro 6, you can start right up with Pro 7, no problem, and vice versa. And the licenses don't affect one another, so if you have a license of Pro 6, you can still use that, and with your license of Pro 7, or vice versa. If you don't have a license for Pro 6, but you do have for Pro 7, that's fine. You can only display with Pro 7. If you have a license for Pro 6 and don't for Pro 7, then you can display with Pro 6 and just play around with Pro 7. That's fine too. So that's the first thing I wanted to tell you about. Secondly, when you open this up, it's somewhat different than Pro 6. And let me talk about some of the differences. First off, it looks different. That's because this used to be over here. And these clear buttons used to be way up here. But when you think about it, there's actually a good reason. The first column over here is everything that you deal with on the slides layer. So it's just to the left of the slides layer. You start top to bottom here, so you get things from the library, you put them into a playlist, and then you have the playlist right here. Once you have the playlist, you can click on anything in the playlist, and that shows up to the right. Likewise, under here, this is where you get stuff that's in the media bin. And once you decide on the folder that you open in the media bin, it shows up right here. And this is how you interact with it. So we have the media layer that is underneath the slides layer. And that's where most people do most of their work most of the time. So if you think of it, this is kind of where you get the stuff. This is where you interact with the stuff. And this is what it looks like. So it actually makes a lot of sense. Now, why the clear buttons over here? Well, clear all, you'll notice, spans this entire size. So it clears all. These buttons are the clear buttons for all the layers in order from bottom, the live video layer, to top, the audio layer. And technically the audio layer may not be exactly on top because it's not a visual layer, but messages is certainly above slides. So you can clear these things individually or clear them all by clicking Clear All. Transport controls down here. This is the slides layer, this is the announcements layer, and this is the audio layer. So if you click on announcements, you can watch the, if there's a video, you can watch the playhead go along. If you can click on the slides layer, if there was a video, you'd watch the playhead go along. And the audio layer, if there's audio, you can watch the playhead go along. The audio bin is down here, and I'm told Renewed Vision has some more plans for things to do with this other than just having a bunch of audio files here. There's some other stuff that may happen sometime in the future, but we'll see what they're doing there. Quick tip, if you don't like the audio bin showing up, you can just simply create an empty playlist, and that's what I typically do, is just leave an empty playlist. One other thing that you really need to know is in Pro 6, if you wanted to just open it up from nothing, the output would be set to whatever it was set to. In Pro 7, you have to take some active steps, and that's the largest amount of what I want to talk about right now. So if we go into Screens, formerly you could get there through Preferences in Pro 6. There is a tab that'll take you there, but it takes you to the screens. So let's just cut out the middleman and go to Configure Screens. Once Configure Screens comes up, I've already added a screen in here, so when you first start you won't necessarily see one. What I want you to do is click on this plus button and decide what screen you want to add. If you're hooked up to the system, then go ahead, click on the screen you want to add. If you're not hooked up to the system and you want just something to stand in the place of the screen, you can add a placeholder screen. So we have new placeholder down here. These are the normal sizes. This is standard definition video, 720p, 1080p, 4K, although technically this is Ultra HD, or custom size. So you could create one of those if you wanted to. Let me create another 720p placeholder screen. So maybe I create this one for church where we're at 720p, but this one is at home because I don't want to hook up to a TV and change it to 720 or anything like that. I can do that. While we're here, there are a couple of other things that you need to know. First off, if you have a screen that you don't want, we can right click and we can either rename it if you did want it and just wanted to change its name, or select delete and it goes away. Renaming it, you just saw how to do that. You can also do a slow double click, so click on it once to select it and again, and it should go in there and you can change its name if you wanted to. Now you'll see here in this section we've got some choices. So single makes perfect sense, you just want to add one screen. But what if you wanted to add a screen that was made up of both of these two screens kind of formed into one? Let's say it was an LED wall, for example, and you wanted to put one right next to the other to make a double wide screen. Well, you could go to Grouped, and we can decide how that goes. You know, by default it's 2 by 2, but if it was double wide, we'd probably want a single row with 2 columns. So we can change this, down to a single row with 2 columns. Now, once I've done that, I've got this one here. I need to tell it what this one is. So I could go down here and do that. And let's say I wanted to choose this one. And then that's good to go. So I've got the placeholder screen here. I could have just as easily chosen it here. And this other screen. Or I could do another placeholder by going down here and new placeholder. So really I have the choice based on my situation. I can also, by the way, while I'm here, do an edge blend. So if I had 2 projectors next to each other, I would want to overlap them a bit and make it so that this one kind of fades into this one, which fades into it. And to change those settings, I click right here in the middle, and you'll see that I've got my different choices of how to do the edge blending: linear, cubic, quadratic. I can change the radius, intensity, the width. See, I can make it blend quite a bit if I wanted to. And I can adjust the color, the gamma and the black in the left and right screen independently. Or I can go back here and change the color of one screen. if I wanted to, click enable. Maybe it's way too red, I could pull down the red, etc. I can also change the corner pinning. This is called keystone correction in most projectors. So I can do that as well. So I've got those options. There's one that I did not show you though. If we go back up here and select mirror, what that says is I've got two outputs and I want them both to have the same thing all the time. They always have the same thing. So I have that as an option as well. There are two types of screens that I didn't tell you about though. If I click the plus, you'll notice down here we have new NDI. Now NewTek, which is the company that makes the TriCaster video switcher, created this protocol for sending video over a network called NDI, which is short for network, because it sends video over a network, digital interface. Works perfectly fine. So if you were looking to send video from ProPresenter over the network to some device that can accept NDI, you could add a screen just for that purpose. And it could be any resolution that's supported. So I added a 720p screen earlier. Let's do a 1080i screen at 59.94. So I've got two 720s, I've got a 1080i. Now I've got another option too. If I had software on the same computer and I'm running on a Mac, which in this case I am, then I could add a siphon screen. Now siphon does basically the same thing that NDI does, but it only does it within the computer. So if I know I'm running something like maybe video recording software that I want to run on the ProPresenter computer, then I could add a siphon screen. Let's say that I only want to record a standard definition version of that. Well, I can do that as well. You might have noticed that I've got quite a lot of screens here. I've got 4, but I'm not limited to 4. I'm limited by how many the computer is able to output. So that's another valuable piece of information, is that the output is not limited by ProPresenter anymore. It's limited by the computer. So if you have a top-of-the-line Mac Pro that costs tens of thousands of dollars, maybe you can add 10 or 15 screens. If you've got a MacBook Air that just barely runs for ProPresenter 7, for example, I don't know exactly how well it would run because you're looking at a MacBook Pro, but let's say that you have a Mac that can only barely output one screen, then just do one. So it's really up to the computer. The same is also true for the stage screens. So if I click here, I can add stage screens all the same ways. I can select the output. Let's say I want to add this one. I could do that. I could add NDI screens. I could add siphon screens. I could add placeholder screens. Any of those choices. Let's, just for giggles, let's add a placeholder screen and let's make it 1080p. So I can add a placeholder screen here. I can tweak the size if I wanted to. And I do have one other option, and that other option is also available up here. You notice it says output target full. Most of the time that's the way you're going to want to leave it. But since this is available on both the audience screens and the stage screen, let me just show you on the stage screen what it does. I could potentially output to part of a screen. So let's say I want to output to half, 2 by 1. So I could say, hey, only output to the left half, which I choose here for left half, of this 1080p screen. Then I could add another one. And again, choose 2 by 1. And this time, the right half. So in this way, I have the ability to select part of it. And there's no reason why I couldn't split it up between the two. So that's how to add screens and how to get started with some of the most basic functions in ProPresenter 7.